So, an intro to our conference today. Um, I'm going to give an introduction now to the actual topic and why we're here. Then we are going to hear from our panel of speakers. Then we will go into breakout rooms. Each breakout room is going to be facilitated by a member of DRUK staff. They will then feed back to us just some top line points from that breakout room. Because there's so many of us here, we obviously want to try and keep this as straightforward as possible and limit the chaos. But then after that feedback point, we will also have some time set aside for Q&A, where you are welcome, as I say, to raise your hands and put questions in the chat, and we will go through those. In terms of why this is important, I mean, I assume that if you have registered to come to this conference this evening, that you already care very much about young disabled voices and young campaigners and how we can have a more representative movement. If you don't, then I hope that you do by the end of this conference. And in terms of why this matters, I think young people are such a unique group. Of course, we're not all young forever. It is, a portion of our lives, and it can really set the trajectory for the rest of our lives in such an impactful way. The policies that we campaign against, some of them impact young people entirely uniquely than how they might impact the rest of us. And some policies only really impact young people. And we've seen a lot over the last few years how the odds have really been more and more stacked against young people, particularly young people with marginalized identities like disabled young people, trans young people, Black young people, the list goes on. We saw obviously with COVID impacted so many of us, but that really disrupted people's educations, sometimes their first experience of making friends, becoming independent, becoming an adult. And then we see as well how inflation in recent years, the cost of living crisis, is, impacting our opportunities, our life chances. We can't find housing, we can't access the things that we should be able to. And as I say, that really sets us up for our lives. We see, a growing mental health crisis with young people as chronically underfunded healthcare means that we can't access the support that we need. And also, individual experiences aside, when we're looking at our movement for not just disabled people and our rights, but all campaigning movements, we think about the long-term sustainability of making change. We're not all here forever. So actually, how do we also really mentor those future leaders and support everyone to feel connected in our movement and, really not only make the change that we want to see, but have community with each other and support each other while we're facing this oppression and we're facing these barriers. This conference does obviously largely focus on the disabled people's movement because we're Disability Rights UK, but that doesn't mean that it's not relevant across the board in campaigning. And of course, we all face systemic barriers. We are all facing the same injustice. And actually, the most important progress we can make is when we come together intersectionally to really, tackle those inequalities and that injustice. DRUK are at the start of a very long journey in how we improve our engagement with young people. We do not profess to be experts on this at all, but we've taken a lot of time recently to talk to organizations who do this really well, engage and involve young people really well in their work and have a very representative voice. And we've learned a lot about not only the barriers that young people face in accessing campaigning, but also in the barriers that organizations face in how they can really involve young people and have a more inclusive organization. So as I say, this isn't about DRUK coming with the answers. This is about creating a space for us to start this conversation and really platform the voices of young campaigners who are already doing an excellent job, recognize how there is so much that we can each each learn from each other. This isn't about us necessarily teaching young campaigners, because a lot of young campaigners in brand new spaces are doing amazing things. So actually, how can we, as I say, be more inclusive and representative, and all come together for our common aims? I'm sure that this conference won't end up with simple answers to some of the questions that we're going to look at, but we look forward to hearing from our speakers who have a range of experience between them, and they are each bringing a topic that they felt was important to raise with campaigners, and to say, this is what brought me into campaigning, these are some of the barriers that I'm facing, and this is what I really think we need to focus on as a movement if we are going to learn from each other and get better at this. I will also put a link in the chat to some of the work that DRUK has been doing with young people, including our new Future Ready e-newsletter and hub, to try and create a space for young people, a dedicated space just for young people on the DRUK website, which up until now has not been in a kind of single place. So as I say, these are the steps that we're taking in a big, long journey, and we really want you to be a part of that. So we hope today that you will take a lot from our speakers, and we will have some really fruitful, interesting conversations in our breakout rooms, and hopefully come away with some ideas and next steps of, you know, how we can do this better and consider this in our day-to-day campaigning. So I'm going to move on to our speakers. If we could just take down the slide that's up, that would be great. Thank you. And first, we are going to hear from Ellen on the importance of protest, accessing protest, and the importance of relationship building. Thank you so much, Ellen. I think just while we... Oh, have you got that? Perfect.
Yeah.
Just sorting out the spotlight. I don't know if that's been sorted yet. Just while we wait for the spotlight, Ellen is a member of DPAC. There we go. That's the Disabled People Against Cuts, and Ellen is here now.
Thanks, Bethany, and thanks for having me here today. As Bethany just said, I'm Ellen Morrison-Smith. I'm on the National Steering Group of Disabled People Against Cuts. I'm going to refer to it as DPAC. I'm going to be talking a bit about protest, and particularly the power of collective action, as well as the importance of mentorship. I think just by existing as disabled people, many of us have already protested against the conditions we experience, whether that's challenging decisions, trying to access social security or social care, or fighting for accessible housing. And I do want to talk in particular about collective protest. Taking part in collective action, I think, can be such a powerful thing to experience. And it can really give us the strength to continue on with all the challenges that we have to battle on our own as well. And I know that one of the other speakers is going to be talking a bit about online campaigning. So I'm going to focus a bit more on in-person protest. But just to say, I think online spaces will always be really important for disabled people. A bit about my background. I got involved in Unite Community several years ago. That's the part of the trade union for Unite for people not in waged work. It was through this and what was then Twitter that I saw the work that DPAC did. And I was really attracted to the direct action that I saw them taking, and I wanted to get involved in that. And there's obviously lots of different ways to campaign for things. So writing letters and contacting political representatives and writing to public bodies. But I think there's something really to be said for joining other disabled people, making some noise and disrupting things through direct action. With DPAC a few years ago, we went to the Department of Work and Pensions to deliver thousands of copies of the Metro newspaper. This was during the time that the Metro was freely available and widely read on people's train and bus journeys. And in that time, the DWP spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on ads in the paper. It was effectively a propaganda campaign. And these ads were concealed as articles that painted universal credit in a false light and didn't reflect what we knew were the punitive experiences that so many people had experienced claiming this benefit. So we delivered this van full of boxes of these Metro newspapers that we had intercepted at train stations up and down the country, and we deliver them at the door of the DWP. And they end up having to close the entrance of the Department for Work and Pensions that day. And we had many people joining us online, and we had some media coverage as well. And some people might reasonably ask, well, what's the point? What's the point in disrupting civil servants just trying to do their job? What's the point in causing this big upset? I think the point really is to demonstrate resistance. Individually, we might make clear our objections, but collectively, you can't ignore us. And it's a reminder to policymakers too that we also hold power. And I think importantly, we might need that reminder ourselves. I know that when I feel worn down by challenging things, I need to remind myself of the power that we hold when we come together. And direct action won't change everything, but I think it's definitely an important tool. And I think campaigning is about using a variety of tools to achieve our aims. I think sometimes it's about making enough noise so that politicians hear us. And sometimes it's about delivering a message that other people will hear to change public opinion on things. But alongside direct action, I think one of the greatest strengths of the disabled people's movement is that connection that we build with others. And I look back at when I first started getting involved in things several years ago, and I have so much appreciation for all the people who patiently explained things to me, who let me get things wrong, who kept me involved in things and encouraged me to turn up to events and protests. And with the amount that we have to challenge in life as disabled people, we absolutely need more and more people involved for it to be sustainable. And I think having been someone who felt like they didn't know anyone or they didn't know anything, building those relationships with people within the disabled people's movement made campaigning feel sustainable for me. It really was that connection with other people that kept me coming back. And I think there are lots of different ways to be supportive of others. But once you start feeling a bit more confident in the space, whether that's in line or in person, I think it's on all of us to try and think about being that encouraging and supportive person for others too. Because I think it can be so easy to get burnt out campaigning, particularly when the stakes for disabled people are just so high. So I'll wrap it up there. I think maybe I'm at 5 minutes, but just really to reiterate that I think coming together with others can be the most powerful thing we can do when we have to face so many battles for equal and decent lives. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That's really important. We're going to move on to Jerry now from No More School Exclusions, who is going to talk about the importance of political education. I'm just waiting for Jerry to be spotlighted. If we give a moment for that.
Can't actually see Jerry in the chat, unfortunately, Bethany.
Oh, it's No More School Exclusions is the name. Sorry.
No more exclusions.
Oh, yeah, sorry. No more exclusions.
There we go.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of No More Exclusions, I just want to say thank you for having us in this space. We're very grateful for the opportunity to sort of bring light to certain things that's done in the grassroots movements. A bit about myself. I am Jerry. I'm one of the founding members of No More Exclusion. I was unfortunate enough to go through 8 different schools without proper help and intervention. Yeah, so in regards to our organization, we are a Black-led sort of abolition community organization, and we work in coalition with other organizations like the DR UK, for example. And our main work is sort of deep and rooted in ending all forms of school exclusion, and particularly in this issue is more so of regarding special education needs and how it affects the marginalized communities. And we see so many young people who are either undiagnosed or misdiagnosed from the perspective of obviously the Black community per se, in the Black and brown community. But this is not to say that it's not affecting our other counterparts, or it's not just an issue of a race thing, but it's something where it's affecting certain communities in different ways. And when certain communities don't have access to certain information, to certain resources, it becomes even harder for them to access some of the support that they're entitled to. And our sister organization, actually, Just Education Matters, they offered us some stats, and they run a workshop recently on how sort of so many young Black people are being let down because of their disability, and they're going sort of unnoticed, and they're sort of just slipping through the cracks because what is happening is there's no proper support in place, and there's no sort of educational healthcare plans in place. That so many families don't understand the processes, so many families don't understand their rights regarding what they can do and how they can challenge these things. And as a result, we're seeing so many young people actually getting kicked out of school, not for their own reason, but because they're not getting that proper support regarding their special education needs. And when we talk about disabilities, I just want everyone to remember it goes beyond just physical disabilities. You have other disabilities that affect individuals in many different ways. And when it comes to the marginalized community, we have to take in consideration how, for example, so many young Black girls go through the system where it's labeled as, for example, having attitude problems, or, for example, it could be something far more deeper than that. And the focus is always tend to be on the behavior rather than the roots and the causes of these sort of behaviors. And none of these stuff are sort of emphasized. And we've been seeing that sort of quite a lot. And in our community, for example, a lot of the focus is always on the behavior, especially the young boys. And something that I experienced myself going through the system and having so many missed opportunities where there should have been intervention. There should have been, for example, coming to me with a plan, with a care plan that involved all the schools that I could have went to, all the people outside of the schools, medical support. I wasn't aware of certain tests that I could have had access to. Instead of being moved from school to school, causing more harm and trauma, I could have just received the proper support. But there's many other young people right now that will go through this and they'll find themselves in worse positions, and that could end up with them being in prison. And from my experience of also being in prison, I've seen so many young people that are in there that they don't need to be in there. All they needed was a certain support, but because they didn't get certain support, that's how they ended up in certain paths. So it's very important to sort of educate families, to educate communities, to educate young people in particular about their rights, and sort of giving them access to resources and information about different disabilities, about understanding, because something that we suffer within the marginalized communities, there's a lot of sort of stigma around once you're diagnosed with something, they'll put your label on you, and nobody wants to really seek that help for family reasons or whatever. But we want to break these barriers, and that's sort of where we bring in the abolition alternatives. And we want to create communities where we break these barriers, we look beyond disabilities, we look beyond people's sort of limits, and we can sort of all just, yeah, support each other in a way that's necessary. Because at the end of the day, as a community, we're all responsible for each other regardless of how your disability looks. We're all very responsible for each other's healing. And as a community, we just want to support each other. But yeah, that's sort of what we're doing at the moment. And yeah, I hope I didn't go over too long.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. I think particularly, that importance on not just us knowing our rights and knowing that we can challenge those experiences, but also being able to challenge that all of that internalized shame that it's not our fault. As you say, you're made to feel like you're the problem rather than actually having this framework alongside our engagement, our campaigning, where we're not just saying, what's your experience, what could have been better, but also really challenging those structures that not only failed to support us, but also it didn't it made us feel like it was our fault. So yeah, really powerful. Thank you. We're gonna hear from Freya now. Freya is a young pioneer at Wiltshire SIL, which is a disabled people's organisation, and she's going to talk to us about the importance of intersectionality. Go ahead.
Thanks, Beth, first of all. And yeah, hi everyone. I'm here to sort of talk about the importance of intersectionality, but in particular focusing on how services and our support often don't see our other identities and just focus purely upon the disability. So a little bit about me. So I'm 23. I live in my own place. I'm also a proud member of the LGBT community and a trans woman who is currently going through the transition. As Beth said, I've been working with Wiltshire Centre for Independent Living, both through their pioneer projects. So we're working with our local authority on the transformation of adult social care, and also the young pioneers, which is people aged 5 to 25, allowing them to have their voices heard and their services developed. And I got involved in the campaign and the work we're doing because of my experience when moving out. So, as I've already mentioned, I am trans, but I've only been out for the last 2 years, well, just under 2 years. And unfortunately, my local authority deemed it to be more cost effective to have live-in care over my PA, who I had before, who understood my situation and was a massive support network. Since having living here, unfortunately, I've had 30 plus carers in such a short period of time, due to them not really understanding my disability or my gender identity. And I know I'm not the only one out there. So statistics show that 32.4% of disabled young people also identify as LGBT. So it's really important to me that all disabled people, regardless of their identity or their background, is being able to become their true selves and be their true selves rather than just being defined by their disability. I think in terms of looking at campaigns, most of it, I feel you need to engage with that community and those young people. This could be done through like social media or community groups and events, allowing them to share their voices and their stories. And then once that is gathered as information, it's then looking at where we take that as either a part of a movement or a campaign. And for me in particular, it would be getting then other local authorities or organisations within adult social care or social care in general to really sort of build that education and that understanding that disabled people aren't just disabled people. There's loads more to us and our identities. And yeah, that pretty much sums me up. I hope it didn't go on for too long.
Not at all. You were actually under 5 minutes. So very, to the point and really important. Thank you. We're next going to hear from Meg on local campaigning. That's Megan Thomas in the chat. Yeah, perfect. Off you go, Meg.
Hi everyone. So I was getting me up. So as we've heard that being a disabled young person can be a very isolating experience, whether that's through isolation from your general community and having a community with other disabled people, or the inaccessibility of other activist spaces. And stereotyping over what a disabled person looks like can lead to a loss of local services and support for younger people who desperately need it. We know there's a lot of issues that affect young people specifically, so being paid less for the same work, not having access to assisted living due to age, levels of loneliness and isolation being extremely high amongst people in their 20s, and just a limited amount of spaces and support networks, particularly if you don't live in a large city. For a bit of background on me, so I'm Meg. I'm a campaigner based in Cardiff, but I'm originally from Stoke-on-Trent. I've worked on campaigns both national and local level since I was a teenager, and from working in a policy role at a national disabled people's organisation, being part of local groups in Cardiff and campaigning within my trade union to make SPLD testing free under the Welsh NHS. A disabled person with a family of disabled people has seen both the need for change and how easy it is to lose touch with your community. Part of the importance of local campaigning is to build and create community wherever you are. Online spaces are absolutely vital spaces for disabled people to join and campaign together, but this should be alongside and the support of local community and action. For younger people, especially people who are living in more rural areas or smaller towns and cities, it can be very difficult to access support. It can be difficult to access support and networks with other younger people, and it's becoming increasingly expensive and out of reach to be able to access those areas. So need to be ensured. So how are we ensuring that they are included and celebrated in our local spaces? I'm a firm believer that strong local groups are how we create strong national campaigns, and strong diverse local groups are how we can support and make sure that issues within our communities and our towns are addressed. And alongside that, becoming disabled can really change the dynamic of how you interact with the community and the support network that you had before. And the creation of these spaces for disabled people is absolutely vital for safety and support and figuring out how to navigate major life change. And so how do we do this? I think there's kind of a couple elements to this. So how small local groups we could be supporting young people in these spaces, and larger groups, and how we could be supporting the actions of groups in the surrounding towns and surrounding area. I think firstly, figuring out where the young people in our local community are and how do we find them, whether that is on social media, whether that's thinking about what are the physical spaces which do attract younger people and where people gather, whether that's when you're attending kind of actions or meetings or any events, whether the younger people in attendance are proactively being engaged with and proactively being spoken to and invited into our groups and being invited to attend future events is really important. Something to be said of all of the love in the world, to not assume that because someone is young, the best use of their skills is to use them on social media. We taking time to actively listen to and take in and utilize younger people's perspectives and ideas. One of the brilliant things about communities of disabled people is that our community is so diverse, and we can see brilliant new fresh ideas coming from young people and taking advantage of this alongside mentorship and sharing of knowledge and support with older disabled people and people who've been campaigning in these areas for a longer time. With large groups, I realise that none of us have a large amount of resources. It could be extremely difficult, but it's really important that we all work together to support smaller disabled people's organisations and support groups, whether this looks like whatever resource and administrative support that can be provided. Sometimes that's just suggesting venues, showing up and supporting events and fundraisers and actions, and kind of showing areas and proactively promoting kind of the work of smaller local groups and from surrounding towns and cities, sharing information and sharing knowledge. One of the groups I was involved with is no longer active, and in a large part is that because we all got ill at the same time, it all ended up falling apart, but it's still a legacy of that community that still exists and is still important, and people are still in touch and connected to each other to this day. and sometimes I feel like finding community, especially multi-generational community, and supporting this where it grows is forgotten. But especially for young disabled people with limited resources and support, these groups are absolutely vital. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. That's really powerful. I think absolutely all disabled people can relate to not having access to community in any form. And it's so important that we have access to that in every possible space. So we've heard about local community, and now we're going to hear about online community as well from Maya. If you could please spotlight her. Thank you. There we go. Perfect.
Hiya, so my name is Maya. I'm also known as Barbie Advocates on TikTok. I started my TikTok page out of necessity from the pandemic, when I realized that all of the information that I needed to keep me safe as somebody who was clinically extremely vulnerable and shielding was incredibly inaccessible. So I created a TikTok account to be able to make that information understandable to the masses. I'm now a accessibility and an inclusion specialist. When I talk about digital community, I can't address all the problems with digital accessibility. Otherwise, I'll definitely go over the 5 minutes. So if you keep that in mind, as I talk about the benefits of digital community is not accessible for all disabled people. So keeping in line with the disability rights and anti-apartheid slogan, nothing about us without us, digital communities make it easy to connect with a large variety of people who have common interests, so there is no excuse to leave us out anymore. I want to talk a little bit about what are digital communities. So digital communities can look very different. It's just a place where people come together around shared interests and goals. Some examples would be a TikTok creators page, just leaving comments in a comment section, Reddit threads and boards, Instagram comment sections or DMs, having consistent lively debates on lives, and spaces where you share resources, articles, or videos. Anywhere that you really interact with another user on a consistent basis, might not be that user, but over kind of consistent topics. So as a young disabled person, there is still a very commonly held belief that you cannot be both young and disabled. People seem to think that disability is mutually exclusive to age. And just kind of young disabled people existing online does a lot for representation. And, people think that, you can't be disabled and do your makeup, you can't be disabled and do your hair, you can't be disabled and be fashionable. And that also feeds into young disabled people struggling to access healthcare, be understood by healthcare professionals, access social security or social care. I think we've all heard the anecdotes about Pip, where you get it refused because you've got earrings in or you've got mascara on or something. Examples of kind of campaigns that young disabled people have really done well on social media are things about attendance awards in school. I might be because I'm in an echo chamber, but they seem to be largely looked down upon, and it does seem to have fed into more of a popular discourse that they are bad and ableist. There does seem to be a kind of belief that you have to kind of look like you're one of the kids on Children in Need, or looking like you're on some kind of like hospital bed death's door to be a young disabled person, or that you're just a young person who doesn't want to go to school and doesn't want to go to work and who is attention seeking. And just doing like a day in the life of a disabled person trying to go to the shops when there's people parked all over the pavements and things like that, all of that helps validate our identity. There are some common myths about digital communities. People think that digital communities don't hold any value. the reality is that digital spaces deliver high engagement and make it easy to share resources, advice, calls to action directly into the devices that we all carry. Messages shared through these spaces often outperform traditional methods of outreach and media. There's a myth that digital communities are harmful. Like any tool, they can be positive or negative. However, dismissing them entirely overlooks their value as essential support networks. For example, my TikTok page often self-moderates, which is what I say for when basically people will troll me or they'll send me hate comments, because I've got a really solid base of people who have followed me over a couple of years. They usually go in to defend me before I even see the comment, because we take quite a lot of pride in what we create. So I get quite a lot of messages from people saying that they love the interactions they have with other people on my page. Online spaces provide also a unique safety for young disabled people because they allow heated debates with any other member of the public without fear of physical harm. So it can be an equalizer. Digital community, there is a myth that digital communities create barriers to social change because they're quite disjointed, but in reality, it enables participation regardless of your geographic or transport constraints of your local area or social constraints. Online tools like translators and assistive technologies often make advocacy more accessible, and digital communities can provide immediate lifelines when it comes to advocacy and solidarity, especially during long waits for health and social care. And also people think that because sometimes digital communities have a high turnover of people who engage with them, that has no value. The freedom to join or leave digital communities ensures a high quality of engagement. For people with ADHD or those struggling with consistency, the flexibility of digital spaces can be very empowering. And one of the ways that kind of traditional organizations could work better with online communities would be if we collaborated with more digital community leaders to share campaigns, resources, and calls to action. By paying digital community leaders, it helps validate their work, strengthens their platforms, and benefits the community. It also ensures a higher standard of moderation and safeguarding. And budgeting to compensate digital leaders for their work will ensure safe and well-managed discussions. So it's important to remember that when we apply for funding for campaigns. And the last thing I want to say is that if funds aren't available, I work mostly with the third sector, so I get it. Show that you value these communities by offering opportunities to amplify the community's voices, raise their profiles, help people with their CVs, provide professional opportunities, and hold the doors open for young people. If you can't pay us, then offer us professional development, networking, and career opportunities. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Maya.